So I'm not one that knows how to read fast necessarily when I'm going through books. I've tried different methods, mostly inspired from like Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek and 4-Hour Body, and recommendations around how to, be a better speed reader. That doesn't necessarily work for me, but I have learned how to be a more effective reader. And because it's a skill that I've had to work at, I've kind of honed a system for becoming more effective as a reader, and I just want to share that. I'm Chelsea from Tech Diva Media, and I love geeking out on creating systems and creating like personal algorithms for how to just become more efficient in the world. And sometimes that looks like spreadsheets, and sometimes it looks like my own little funky notes and ways of figuring things out. But learning how to read more effectively has been one of the best things I've figured out in the last year or so, because it means I can read a lot more nonfiction books and study and learn and absorb it in ways I never could before. So I wanted to share with you the 5 things I do to become more effective as a reader and to really comprehend and get through material and be able to reference back to it and absorb what I learn. So the first step, like if I've heard of a book that I want to read, and this applies to nonfiction. So if I've heard of a book, I first go to Amazon and read the reviews. And I typically will start with, of course, some of the top reviews, of course, and then I'll probably read the highest rated low review, and then I'll usually read reviews that are in the 3 to 4 stars. And I'll probably read like 10 reviews or so to start to understand. A lot of times I found so many good books from reviews where someone will say like, this book was good, but this other book actually did a better job at encapsulating the key points or whatever, or if you like this book is another one I recommend. So I've learned so much from combing through those Amazon reviews. And then in addition to Amazon, sometimes I'll go to Reddit and I'll search Reddit, and then like in Google search, I'll type Reddit and then I'll put the book title. So Reddit and then in quotes, how to read a book, which is also a good book, by the way, How to Read a Book. But that's the first thing, is just looking at reviews on Amazon specifically, and sometimes Reddit. And the second thing I'll do then is I'll look for interviews that the author's done on podcasts. So especially if they've come out in the last couple years, usually when they do a book launch, they do a book tour, and in today's world, that means they're probably on, 10 podcasts at least. So I'll search in my on my iPhone, I'll search in the podcast, and I'll look for the author's name and just see the different shows. And typically there's a few shows that I really like, so if I find those and that host has interviewed them, I'll listen to that one. And if I tend to listen to at least two different interviews by the author, maybe 3, because they're going to repeat themselves in an interview and they're going to say kind of the main concepts of the book. So at this point, I've read some reviews, I have a concept of what the book's about. Now I've listened to the author speak about the book and the key points and why they wrote it and have a much greater context. And a lot of times, just that alone gives you the basis, especially with a nonfiction book, of the meat of the book. Sometimes that's all you really need. But that'll be step 2. And if I really am liking it and I want to get into like the greater details, then I want to actually go to the book. So then step 3 is to get the book. I tend to like audiobooks because I can absorb them while I'm driving or while I'm hiking or while I'm working out. So I do a lot of audiobooks, but some people prefer Kindle or written book. Either way, if I get audio and it's good enough, I'll always buy the written book and then go back and highlight it. But I'll get the book then and listen to it, and I'll listen to it in chunks, because if I try to blow through all of the book, unless it's a short book, certainly there's just so much information. So I'll listen to it in chunks, and say I'll listen to however long, one day while I'm driving or while I'm working out, and then the very next day after I've listened to that chunk, then my 4th step is then I will record an audio note back to myself on what I learned. And it's usually a minute or 2 minutes. I don't want to have long summaries because I'll never go back and listen to those. But what that's doing is having me voice back to myself to teach myself what I learned. And if I don't have someone I'm talking about it with, that's a great way for my brain to take it from my brain into speaking out what I learned. And because it's a day later after I've read that chunk, I've had time to assimilate what the information was. And when I'm speaking it back, I'm not just, parroting back the information. I'm putting together the concepts in my brain and speaking it back to myself, like a future memorandum to myself, or like my future self writing a memorandum. And I really do try to keep it to 1 to 2 minutes, no longer than that. So it is a bite-sized chunk of what I learned in what I read yesterday. and I'll save that on my notes or my voice notes on my phone. And sometimes I'll have that transcribed, but a lot of times just speaking it out is what I needed. And I have that saved in a folder then on my voice memos. And then I'll send that voice memo file to myself and drop it in my files or email it to myself or text it to myself or whatever. But I'll send that audio chunk to myself. So that's that's the fourth piece. And then finally, maybe I might have gotten through most of the book after, reading 3/4 of it, and I might not even finish the book if I feel like I've gotten the meat of it, especially with nonfiction books. But whether or not I finished it, once I had that collection of the chunks of what I've learned, then I'll finally wrap up after I've completed the book or enough of it that I want to complete, then I'll make a Google Notes or Google Doc. And I'll just jam out some of the notes of what I remember of the book as a whole now, because I've recorded these little quick segments. The thing I like of the book, the voice notes, is that it's very fast, so I tend to do it. If it's not a fast process, you likely won't stick to the process, right? So the audio notes in the segments helps me to very quickly get my thoughts down. And then the final thing is just to type up kind of my summary in a 1-page or less version of what I learned in the book. And I'll save that Google Doc and the voice note file into a Google Drive folder that I then title with the title of the book chapter. So now I've got Google Drive with a folder called Books, and then in the side of that, then I have, at this point, 20, 30 folders, each one a book title, and within that folder, then there's a notes or a Google Doc with my notes that I've typed up, like the overall summary, and then there's audio files, and there may be 5 audio files that are 1 to 2 minutes long of me summarizing as I read through the chunks. And by the time I do all that, I have the book down, at least enough that I feel I need. And that's sort of my way of hacking into a very effective way to absorb a lot of information. And when I'm taking those breaks in between, my brain sort of just takes it and puts it all together. And I'll find that a couple weeks later, a month later, what I learned from a book before now is assimilating with the current book I'm reading, and all those ideas are coming together, and now I'm tethering them into my own new ideas that have come from reading these books. So I'd love to know for you what you do to read books effectively, and if this sounds like a cool hack or a cool strategy or system with these different steps, I'd love to hear from you, how it works, or what do you think? Really appreciate you watching. Again, I'm Chelsea from Tech Diva Media, techdivamedia.com, and this is my personal hack for becoming a more effective reader, even if I'm not a fast reader.